The peace agreement, intended to end all future conflict, established the specific economic and psychological conditions for a global explosion. Within the Hall of Mirrors, Allied diplomats signed a document that set the territorial triggers for a war that would eventually claim 60 million lives. To enforce this new era, they created the League of Nations. It was an international body tasked with resolving disputes through diplomacy rather than artillery. But the League lacked a military force, relying entirely on the fragile goodwill of exhausted nations. Germany faced the most severe consequences. The treaty stripped the country of 12% of its land and demanded crushing financial reparations. This fueled the stab-in-the-back myth, claiming the German military had been betrayed by its own politicians rather than defeated on the battlefield. The 1929 economic collapse intensified this resentment. The Great Depression wiped out financial markets and left millions destitute. Across Europe, ordinary citizens found themselves queuing for basic rations, abandoned by the democratic governments that had promised stability. Desperation provided a platform for extremists. Adolf Hitler weaponized public anger to dismantle the German Republic. Benito Mussolini promised a return to Roman glory in Italy, while in Japan, a militant faction seized control, seeking new territories to sustain their failing economy. By the early 1930s, national humiliation and catastrophic poverty had aligned. The global system was saturated with resentment and fully armed. Authoritarian regimes recognized that the winners of the First World War were too broke and traumatized to enforce global boundaries. The threat of a Second World War made the democracies hesitant to act. Japan tested this hesitation first. In 1931, the Japanese military invaded Manchuria to secure the natural resources required for its empire. The League of Nations condemned the violence, but sent no troops. Japan simply walked out of the League and kept the territory. Mussolini followed this example. In 1935, Italy marched hundreds of thousands of troops into Ethiopia. The Ethiopian emperor pleaded for help, but the global response was limited to economic sanctions that carefully avoided cutting off Italy's vital oil supply. Violating international boundaries resulted in little more than diplomatic scoldings. Dictators realized that as long as they were willing to ignore angry letters, their territorial conquests would remain permanent. This failure to defend borders in Asia and Africa served as a massive signal back to Europe. For fascist leaders, the path to aggressive territorial expansion was now clear. On the map of Central Europe in the early 1930s, Hitler's ideology required Lebensraum, living space acquired from sovereign neighbors. He remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936. When France did nothing, he pushed further, absorbing Austria in 1938 to take its industrial resources without firing a shot. Rather than confront Hitler with military force, Britain and France tried diplomacy. They operated on the belief that conceding to his specific territorial demands would eventually satisfy his appetite and prevent a Second World War. This strategy culminated at the 1938 Munich Conference. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stood next to Hitler, agreeing to let Germany annex the Czechoslovakian Sudetenland. Chamberlain returned home claiming he had secured peace for our time. 6 months later, German troops rolled into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Hitler tore up the agreement, proving that diplomatic concessions were useless against a leader intent on continental domination. The German military was now an industrial juggernaut. Columns of mechanized armor blitzed across the continent, crushing defensive lines and forcing the total surrender of France within months. With Western Europe under his control, Hitler betrayed Stalin and launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The conflict was about to expand into a truly global struggle. In the Pacific, Japan's brutal campaign through China had provoked a U.S. oil embargo. Facing a total resource collapse, the Japanese military launched a desperate strike to remove the American Navy from the Pacific theater. On December 7, 1941, Japanese bombers destroyed the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. Days later, Germany declared war on the United States, merging the regional wars in Asia and Europe into a singular world war. World War II was the cost of global inaction. It proved that ignoring aggressive authoritarian expansion to save the peace is the fastest way to lose it entirely.